Hey, what's up, guys? Hello for Football Talk here. Now that we're just a little more than a week away from the 2020 NFL season being kicked off, with the Texans traveling to Kansas City to take on the Super Bowl champion Chiefs, I'm ready to commit to all my predictions finally, as I've done for several years now, which you can check out on my page, helloswithfootballtalk.com. I'm going to forecast all the major season awards, such as MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and all the other ones, before giving you my playoff picks on Friday. So with that being said, here are my award predictions for this upcoming season. We're going to start things with the Comeback Player of the Year. And this one is always a bit of a question mark to me in terms of what actually qualifies as a comeback season. We've seen players returning from injury that take home the honors. We've seen some others have another great season after they've been stuck in the mud kind of for a few years now. And at times, we've even seen guys that were out of the league for a season win this award. But my number 3 candidate here actually is the only player of this group that was really out of the league last season, Rob Gronkowski. From what we've seen, he seems to be back to the 2018 form, and maybe that year off was actually the perfect thing for him, after he did look pretty broken down when we last saw him out there during the playoff run. Even if he still made some big plays for his team, obviously, the big catch in the Super Bowl to kind of seal the deal. But when we think back to this last season that he had with New England, he was really the only dependable target outside of Julian Edelman. You compare it to this offseason, him joining Tampa Bay, which is the reigning number 1 passing offense, with the premier duo of receivers in the game with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, some improvements being made on the offensive line, and then obviously adding his old friend Tom Brady to the mix. It's absolutely an upgrade here. If his body's back to full strength, and opposing defenses need to keep those 2 safeties high against the receivers that the Bucs have, which leaves the seams open for the Gronkster going downfield, or he's just one-on-one against the linebacker, watch out. My only real concern here for the new Bucs tight end is the fact that they have 3 legitimate options at the tight end position to take away snaps, with O.J. Howard and Cameron Brate on there as well. But I think we'll see some heavy 12 personnel from Bruce Arians and Byron Leftwich. And I actually picked Gronk over a couple other guys that I was thinking in this discussion, who I believe might actually be more productive, just because of the narrative around him, how that will lead to votes. My second choice for Comeback Player of the Year here, Matt Stafford. And a few weeks back, I had a line for him, which still kind of makes me chuckle, when I said Stafford finally broke the back that he had carried the Lions franchise on for years now. Really for most of his career, Detroit did not have any running attack to speak of, only had one 1,000-yard rusher in 11 seasons there with Reggie Bush back in 2013. The offensive line has been a bit of a question mark on several occasions, and he only had 1 year where the defense actually played at a really high level, and they haven't finished above 13th in points allowed outside of that. Right now, I feel as good about the surrounding pieces on offense for Stafford as I've ever done maybe, with a nice trio of receivers, investments being made into the offensive line, and a dynamic duo of backs to take some pressure off the quarterback, with Kerryon Johnson and now DeAndre Swift being added to the mix, and just more of a focus on the rushing attack. Last year, in his second season in Darrell Bevell's system, Stafford had the looks of an MVP candidate over the first half of the season, and he might even be more comfortable in 2020. I probably have mentioned this before, I'm not a huge believer in Matt Patricia, but he should finally have all the pieces to run the New England defense and not put the offense in catch-up mode as much as they have been. When I went back to the statistics, to my surprise, Stafford actually played all 16 games for 8 straight years now before 2019, but he's been fighting through some injuries routinely, and now that he'll be back to 100%, finally as part of a team rather than the savior, I think he can light up some defenses. But my favorite to win the award? Ben Roethlisberger. He suffered what seemed like a harmless elbow injury early on in week 2 of last season, but Big Ben had to have surgery on it and was out for the year in the process. And while it does feel kind of like an entirety by now, in just 2018, Ben led the league with over 5,100 yards passing, finished 5th with 34 passing touchdowns, and was the biggest reason their offense finished top 6 in both yards and points gained. The biggest difference between that group and what they have now is the departure of Antonio Brown, who at that point obviously was still one of the truly elite receivers in football. Last season, Juju Smith-Schuster was never really healthy, fighting through some nicks and bruises here and there, and a lot of his lack of production obviously had to do with who threw him the ball over the final 14 plus games, but he still has to prove he's that clear-cut number 1 option. But with that being said, I like the different weapons at the disposal of the Steelers quarterback here, and how they can maybe alleviate some pressure off Juju. I already predicted Deontay Johnson to have a breakout season, really a big fan of his. James Washington, he showed some signs in 2019. They brought in Eric Ebron, who can be that move tight end to create mismatches. And then the second round pick, Chase Claypool, he has enormous potential if you just don't ask him to do too much right away. When I look at the rest of the offense, I think they still have a top 10 O-line and a nice mix of backs, while the defense might be the best from top to bottom to give the ball back to the offense and let Big Ben go to work. I think the Steelers are a dangerous team, and Ben could have another big season. A couple other guys I like in this discussion. AJ Green with the Bengals, now with improved quarterback play after he ended up missing all of last season, could re-establish himself as one of the better receivers in the game. And then Bradley Chubb with the Broncos, he missed his entire sophomore campaign, but looked like a monster in preseason before then, and already the big rookie year. Him rushing the passer with 1 mil on the other end, Joel Casey now on the inside, he could really eat in year 3. Now let's move on to our next award, the Offensive Rookie of the Year. Last year, I thought the voters made a bit of a mistake here by voting for Kyler Murray, who, to be fair, was really fun to watch, and I'm a big believer in him going forward. But the body of work for Josh Jacobs that he had put together with the Raiders, to me, deserved more recognition. So I was a little hesitant to put 2 more running backs up here in the rankings, with what we've seen recently, with Dak Prescott taking home the trophy as well over his teammate Ezekiel Elliott, back when those two were rookies. But historically speaking, running backs still tend to be the favorites. But with that being said, at number 3, I still go with the quarterback here. Actually, the first overall pick in the draft, Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals. Burrow had an all-time great season in his senior year with LSU, completing 76.3% of his passes for almost 5,700 yards and 60 touchdowns. The Bengals let Andy Dalton walk this offseason, leaving no doubt that the rookie quarterback will take over the reins right away. When I look at the surrounding pieces, I think the O-line still needs some work here, but their collection of skill position players is actually really impressive. That is for the most part if AJ Green is back to 100%, because they still have Tyler Boyd as a dependable target out of the slot. Auden Tate, he really showed some signs last season. John Ross should at least give them a field stretcher, hopefully. And then 33rd overall pick, T. Higgins, he's awesome at the point of the catch, which meshes really well with Burrow's precise ball placement. You combine that with maybe the most underrated two-way back in the game in Joe Mixon, and a duo of tight ends that Cincinnati apparently really likes. And there are all the ingredients there for a much more wide open offense. I still have to see how much Zach Taylor actually caters the offense to what Burrow did at LSU, but especially with a shortened offseason program, I expect that to happen for the most part. My number 2 option here, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. And when they selected Taylor in the 2nd round of the draft, I immediately put this on my Instagram story, saying JT behind that Colts O-line, I'm calling for Offensive Rookie of the Year right now. I also talked about him recently when I broke down some of my favorite targets in fantasy drafts, since I think his ceiling is just enormous. With almost 6,200 rushing yards and 50 touchdowns in his 3 years at Wisconsin, no other rookie has a resume quite as impressive as Taylor's. And even though I think Marlon Mack is a really solid starter, he doesn't have the brute strength or home run ability of this kid. Early on, I don't really see him staying on the field for 3rd downs a whole lot, and the biggest concern here are fumbles, which could be the difference between him taking home this award and splitting touches with Mack. But I just think with his tremendous ability behind what I think is the best offensive line in football, I can't overlook the potential. Now that they brought in Michael Pittman Jr. with that other 2nd round pick they had as that big-bodied ex-receiver, Paris Campbell showing some flashes in camp already after he was banged up for most of the year and could be kind of a gadget player for them as well. And then T.Y. Hilton hopefully being back healthy. This could be a much more productive group overall, and I think Taylor could rack up those touchdowns as well. And my favorite, a long time I actually had him second this discussion, but now that Damian Williams has also opted out of the 2020 season, I just can't get away from Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the Chiefs' 1st round pick out of LSU. General manager Brett Veach could have addressed a rather thin secondary or even traded up a few spots to grab one of those top-tier linebackers in the draft, but instead they just sat there at 32 and invested even more into the strength, which is this explosive offense, with a guy that they have compared already favorably to Brian Westbrook. CEH was a bowling ball in college who constantly ran through defenders and picked up crucial 1st downs on the way by willing himself across that line no matter who was in his way. He's great at running duo, showcasing the patience to allow blockers to set things up, and then has that short area quickness to avoid charging defenders. I've mentioned this before a few times. I expect him to give Kansas City more of a physical presence to complement that high-flying passing attack. However, what I think makes the difference here between my number 2 choice, Taylor, and Edwards-Helaire is his involvement in the passing game. Clyde was used a lot as a coverage indicator of motions and not only ran downfield routes out of the backfield, but also lined up wide quite a bit and ultimately caught 55 passes for 453 yards in his final year of the Tigers. Even just on those little checkdowns, he was a load to bring down for defenders, and to have that as a fallback plan, if none of those speedsters get open downfield, that's a scary sight and might ultimately make the Chiefs almost undefensible. A couple of rookie receivers I like in this discussion. Jalen Reagor with the Eagles. He could be a guy who leads all rookies in all-purpose yards, with that ability in the return game, being involved in gadget plays, and as a downfield receiver. And then Jerry Jeudy with the Broncos, just because of how advanced he is with his route running, a spread-orientated offense under Pat Shurmur. Could really see him produce here. But now let's move to the defensive side of the ball with the Defensive Rookie of the Year. And this award, like Defensive Player of the Year actually, a lot of times goes to the guy with the most turnovers or the most sacks. So you always have to look at how productive these players can be. When you look at Jeff Okudah, for example, with the Lions, I believe he'll be a great corner, but might not be in this discussion just because he doesn't have those turnovers some other guys do. But my number 3 option here, Antoine Winfield Jr., now with the Bucks. And I originally had another safety up here, but with the uncertainty about Grant Delpit and his injury with the Browns, apparently have a torn Achilles, not confirmed yet at this point when I'm recording this video. Instead of him, I chose one of my favorite guys I watched for the draft with Winfield. He may be undersized, and there are guys who have a little more of that top end speed, but boy, this kid can play. Winfield missed almost 2 full seasons with Minnesota, but when he was out there, he was a true playmaker for the Gophers. You saw him come down into the box, not showing any hesitation to crash into bigger bodies in the run game. He also manned up against tight ends, blitzed from slot, covered the deep half or middle, pretty much doing everything in that secondary. I expect him to be that same versatile piece in the back end for defensive coordinator Todd Bowles, similar to what he had in Arizona with the Honey Badger and Tyrann Mathieu. Looking at his Bucs defense, they have 2 monsters in the middle to stop the run on early downs, guys who can crash off the edges against the pass, 2 super rangy linebackers, and a young secondary overall that is really starting to come together. With Winfield's smarts and ball hawking skills for the position, it'll allow him to make some big plays for this defense, which I expect to finish top 10 in the NFL, and this rookie safety could be a guy who hears his name called repeatedly. Just ahead of him, one of my top 20 prospects in the draft, Patrick Queen, the inside linebacker for the Ravens now, and with him, it might actually be a little more about the situation that he finds himself in. Baltimore obviously has a rich history of inside linebackers, and a big reason those guys have had the success they have shown has been a lot about the bodies that they've had in front of them. While the Ravens did lose Michael Pierce in free agency, this allows Brandon Williams to move back to his more natural fit at the nose, with Calais Campbell and Derek Wolfe being the base ends and kind of rocks against the runny as well. That should allow Queen to stay clean and shoot through gaps for those tackles for loss, or chase guys down to the edge if they are forced to bounce outside. As far as the pass game goes, the former LSU backer is still learning the intricacies of coverage play, but he has tremendous range to limit yards after the catch, already does a pretty good job of reading the eyes of the quarterback, and has those fluid hips to turn and run with backs and tight ends. However, what might have put Queen over some of the other candidates in this discussion is the scheme Baltimore runs, with a lot of heavy pressure looks on third downs, where the inside backers line up in the A-gaps, are brought on cross blitzes or the late rushes, all that kind of stuff. I project Queen to record over 100 tackles, double digits of those for loss, 5+ sacks, and a couple of picks maybe. That should get him some recognition. But my favorite, no surprise at the top here, it's Chase Young, the number 2 overall pick. At some point I thought about putting a different name up here, but how can you go against the guy who was my highest rated defensive prospect since Von Miller? Chase Young was playing out of his mind in 2019 when he broke Ohio State's all-time sack record with 16.5, recorded 21 tackles for loss and 7 fumbles forced in just 12 games. While he doesn't quite have the technical advancement at this stage of his football career as the 2 Bosa brothers had, for example, he has picked up a lot of the famous hand swipes, and at the same time, he has better speed and bend around the corner than those guys. He might not be in the most pass-happy division in the NFL necessarily in the NFC East, but I just love what Washington has put together around him in the years prior already. Having the 2 Bama boys and Jonathan Allen, Deron Payne inside, to go with Montez Sweat, potentially breaking out in year 2 as well, and being able to learn from a highly productive veteran, Ryan Kerrigan, that should allow Young to work on a lot of one-on-one matchups and just be put in some great situations to succeed. With Ron Rivera coming in and bringing Jack Del Rio with him, this defense will heavily rely on the front 4 getting home and playing coverage behind him, which should lead to most of the sacks being split between the D-line, and double-digit sacks right now sounds like a realistic goal for Young. 2 more guys that I want to mention here, Isaiah Simmons with the Cardinals, freakish athlete in the middle of that defense with a lot of beef added up front, should be allowed to stay clean as well and run around and make plays. And then third round pick Zach Baum from Wisconsin, now with the Saints. I think he could give them a dynamic piece, standing up and making some plays in coverage, and then coming down as a rush end on passing downs. He's a guy that I have my eyes on. But now let's talk about some of the coaches. With the Coach of the Year award, and this one usually is one of the easier ones to determine since it mostly goes to the coaches of the best teams in the NFL. I went with the two head coaches that I believe will call the shots for the two number one seeded teams in either conference, and the other one to me still is a rising coach who is taking a team that had been out of the playoffs for more than 20 years to a couple of appearances already and is now in position to take another step forward. And that last guy I just talked about, Sean McDermott of the Buffalo Bills. What he and general manager Brandon Beane have done over the 3+ years together in Buffalo has truly been outstanding. They have changed around the culture and brought in players that fit their system to a T. I still think the Bills are on an upward trajectory, and to give you a little sneak peek already, me projecting them to go 11-5 with the AFC's number 3 seed earned. I hope McDermott gets the recognition he deserves. With improvement from quarterback Josh Allen, who now has a true number 1 receiver in Stephon Diggs that will open up the offense with his ability to stretch the field, potentially a strong 1-2 punch at the running back position, and a defense that seems to be in the right position every single week because of what the game-specific coaching can do for them. That's a team that you don't want to face. For Buffalo, this is their time to shine, and since I project them to win the AFC East for the first time since 1995, I believe the voters will show the head coach some love as they finally get to host a playoff game in the blistering January cold once again. Just too bad that that wild crowd will probably not be allowed to be there when they at last see their team run onto the field to kick off the new year. The guy I actually project to take his team to the number 1 seed in the AFC, John Harbaugh, I could absolutely see him be a repeat candidate here since I project the Ravens to go 13-3 and be the top seed in the AFC. It might be a tougher task now with the Steelers getting Big Ben back, the Browns bound to improve simply because of how much talent they have on that roster, and the Bengals not looking like they will pick first overall again. However, I think Baltimore actually has a better all-around team than what they had when they had an NFL best record of 14-2 last season, and there should be no missing motivation here after an ugly exit in the divisional round at home against the Titans. For Harbaugh in particular, his willingness to embrace analytics in terms of in-game decision making and how he puts equal focus on all 3 phases of the game as a former special teams coordinator with excellent teachers in place of those 3 coordinator positions, this should be a very well-rounded team. With revenge wins over Kansas City and Tennessee on the slate potentially, they won't leave anything decided on the table, and you should come back on Friday for my playoff predictions to see if I think they can carry that momentum into January. But my favorite here, switching to the NFC side of things, Sean Payton with the New Orleans Saints. It's been 14 years since Payton last was named Coach of the Year, with some great regular season teams since then, but I think this could be his best one since winning the Super Bowl a decade ago. When you have a true master of his craft like Payton, you know he will always find a way to keep his team motivated, and he will once again call the shots for one of the top offenses in the NFL. This is Drew Brees' final run at another championship. They have elite offensive line and skill position play. The defense has a great mix of productive veterans and young guys. And as I've discussed before, the Saints will be in cap hell after the season, so they better make it work now. Another interesting dynamic here, Sean Payton has already had COVID-19, and he probably understands the measurements necessary to prevent it from spreading firsthand. So I'm interested to see if that can give him any advantage over the other coaches. But as far as this award goes, I ultimately went with Payton over Harbaugh just because of what kind of gauntlet I think the AFC will once again be, and them emerging from it as the number 1 seed, that will be highly impressive. A couple other names to keep an eye on, Frank Reich with the Indianapolis Colts, if they can win the South and maybe challenge for that 3rd or 2nd seed even, and then Mike McCarthy with the Cowboys, after they failed to win the division last year. With all that talent on the roster, maybe he can get them into a winning mold and earn one of the top seeds in the NFC. But let's get back to the players here, with the Offensive Player of the Year. Still something that I'm hesitant to do, to list candidates for MVP and Offensive Player of the Year, since this overlaps a lot, and I still don't get how the most valuable player isn't also the Offensive or Defensive Player of the Year. But since MVP is almost a pure quarterback award, here are a couple other names. At number 3, second-year quarterback Kyler Murray. I expect him to take another big step coming into his sophomore campaign. The reigning Offensive Rookie of the Year immediately transformed one of the most boring offenses in the league into an exciting attack, despite not having a lot of weapons around him for most of the season. For Kyler individually, he was responsible for 24 touchdowns and finished second behind only Lamar Jackson with 544 rushing yards on the season. He did all of that despite having guys charge at him constantly, with 48 sacks being allowed by the offensive line, and his best receiver still being the 35-year-old Larry Fitzgerald. This offseason, Arizona traded for an elite wideout in DeAndre Hopkins to go with a healthy Christian Kirk, Andy Isabella coming into year 2, at least maybe being that deep threat for them, Fitzy still being there, and a guy that I really liked in last year's draft in Hakeem Butler. He'll be out here for his first season after he was out for all of 2019. Running back Kenyon Drake will also play a full 16 games for the Cardinals after how dynamic he looked over the second half of the season once he came over from Miami. As far as the offensive line goes, they should at least be marginally better, while I also like a lot of the things they do on defense now. If Kyler can lead this team to one of the final playoff spots in the NFC, and he probably puts up some big numbers in the process, I think he'll get some attention here. The second guy in this discussion, Lamar Jackson. I'm going to talk about him a little more in the MVP discussion, but just right away, his dynamic ability as a runner puts him a little higher than the two other guys that I have him rivaling for the MVP award. But my pick here, maybe a little bit of a surprise, Saquon Barkley. To me, the most talented and best running back in the NFL. Just how explosive he is, the power he has to break tackles, yet at the same time how elusive he is in the open field, and having that breakaway speed at 230 pounds, that's just special stuff. I thought Saquon was the most impressive back in the league as a rookie already, and last season he lost some of that shine due to being banged up for almost half the year, and the spectacular season that Christian McCaffrey had. With Joe Judge coming in as the new head coach, having that New England mindset of running the ball at a high rate, and new offensive coordinator Jason Garrett focusing on the ground game heavily himself, I see no reason why Saquon shouldn't touch the ball 350 to 400 times. For Big Blue, they already have a pretty good trio of receivers to spread the field and open up room on the inside. The O-line should be upgraded with 4th overall pick Andrew Thomas coming in, and with Daniel Jones taking snaps from the shotgun, he's a threat to pull the ball, which can bind one of the backside defenders. The only real concern for me here is that I don't expect the G-Men to win a lot of games and them having to go away from the run too early, but Saquon's also a master at making something happen after catching quick checkdowns as well, so just the sheer numbers I expect him to put up could allow him to take home the honors. A couple other guys in this discussion, Patrick Mahomes, he'll obviously always be there, and he might show up among my MVP candidates. And then I also think George Kittle could be a guy to really take off, has been so productive his last 2 years. But now with Emmanuel Sanders off the team, Deebo Samuel probably missing some time, he could see a lot more targets his way, and we know what he can do with those after the catch. Maybe the voters also give him a little credit for his blocking. But now let's move back to the defensive side of the ball. Defensive Player of the Year. And to be named DPOY, you usually have to put up some big numbers and make those impact plays that people really remember. Last season I thought was pretty unique, since Stephon Gilmore was a true shutdown corner, but he also tied for the lead league in picks with 6 of those, and scored a couple of touchdowns. Usually, this award favors pass rushers and those ball-hawking safeties. But my number 3 candidate, somebody who hasn't gotten the credit he deserves over his last 4 years in the desert, Chandler Jones. Over that 4-year stretch, Jones leads the league in total sacks with 60, is tied for the most forced fumbles with 17, and has been near the top in quarterback pressures every single season. What makes all those numbers even more impressive is the fact that he has done it for a losing franchise for the most part. That has led to limited opportunities to rush the passer overall, but also not as many obvious passing situations where Jones was just able to get off the ball with the other team trying to catch up. Arizona is bound to improve from a bottom 10 rush defense with that added beef up front and a freakish rookie on the second level in Isaiah Simmons, which will already give their pass rushers more opportunities in general, but with the offense ready to take another step with Kyler Murray coming into year 2 and really upgrading their receiving corps, this team should have to lead more often and make those sacks or strips late in games seem bigger than they have before. I believe Jones will once again be in the race for the Deacon Jones Award, which goes to the player of the most sacks in the season, and he'll get more love with the added attention for Arizona. Right ahead of him, I have Darius Leonard, and now that Luke Kuechly is retired, I think Bobby Wagner has the crown as the best inside linebacker in the game, but among the 2 or other 3 names that I think could surpass him in the discussion in the near future is this guy. The guy nicknamed the Maniac has made plays all over the field ever since coming into the league. In 28 career games, Leonard has put together 284 tackles, with 182 of those solo fashion, 12 sacks, 7 interceptions, and another 15 passes deflected. And he did all of that playing for a defense that didn't have a lot of disruptors up front and had been suffering injuries in the secondary. You look at the Colts this offseason, trading for 49ers team MVP DeForest Buckner, who to me has entrenched himself as a top 50 overall player in the league and is one of the very best at creating chaos up front. I think Leonard will feast more from those opportunities to clean up or shoot through gaps that open up as the offensive line can't get off those double teams quickly enough to put hands on the linebacker. I think third-year edge rusher Kamoko Toure, he's a candidate breakout as well when he's healthy, and I just find myself coming back to Indy's schedule. Half of the teams that they'll be playing finish in the bottom third in terms of scoring offense. But my favorite here, Myles Garrett, after he got his big contract and is on a team that is ready to finally make some noise, I expect this guy to have a big season. What happened in Week 11 against the Steelers last year, it wasn't pretty, and there's no need to discuss it any longer, but I believe while Garrett has learned his lesson, he's also ready to come back with a vengeance. Over the 10 games he played last season, the former number 1 overall pick recorded 10 sacks and 18 more hits on the quarterback to go along with 11 tackles for loss and the league best disruption rate of 18.5%, which is a combination of pressures and sacks divided by pass rush attempts. So even then, he would have probably been in the discussion with Defensive Player of the Year with a full season of production, and I expect him to be even more disruptive, playing for a better team. When I go back to Garrett coming out of Texas A&M, he has already really come along as a pass rush technician after he mostly relied on his athleticism and a couple of moves early on in his career. Now he's had a lot of time in the lab to work on his craft and might have a couple of new tricks to show for it. As far as the Browns go, I like what is going on in the secondary. The other guys on the D-line should be healthy to start the season, and maybe most important, I expect the Browns to be in a lot more positive game script situations. The offense has so much potential, and I like Kevin Stefanski to sustain some drives with a more run-oriented approach. That should allow Garrett to stay fresh, and as teams have to get more pass-reliant, number 95 can just tee off and get after opposing passes at a high rate. 2 more candidates here. Fred Warner of the 49ers. I think he's on his way to become a superstar at the position. And then TJ Watt with the Steelers, do-it-all guy, great pass rusher, gets the ball out of the hands of quarterbacks, but can also drop back and make plays in coverage. But that brings us to a final award, and the most heralded, most valuable player. And let's not get this wrong, this is a quarterback award. We have seen other positions get attention in this discussion, but in the end, Adrian Peterson has been the only non-quarterback since 2007 to take home the trophy. And at number 3, my one candidate from the NFC here, Dak Prescott of the Cowboys. He already put up career highs in completions, passing yards with over 4,900, and touchdowns with 30 of those last season. But I expect those numbers to go even higher now. When you look at Dallas last season, offensively they already put up some big numbers, but those didn't always result in wins. There were different issues with that, whether it was going away from the run in some games, their stars not really coming through in the big games, including Dak, or a defense just not making any game-changing plays. I expect Ezekiel Elliott to be trimmed down a bit and have that extra gear again in 2020. The defense will be changed up a bit with a new coordinator and some veterans being brought in, and they maybe have the best tree of receivers in the league, with Amari Cooper being a master route runner, Michael Gallup working the sideline and making big catches downfield, and now rookie CeeDee Lamb not only giving the beast at the catch point, but even more so with the ball in his hands. Dallas has all the ingredients to be an explosive aerial attack with those guys. You combine that with what I believe is still one of the best offensive lines, play action being more effective, and the coaches allowing Dak to throw in first downs more hopefully, that could make this a scary squad. For Dak personally, being a little more efficient and leading his team to double-digit wins as I predicted, that should put him in the MVP race. At number 2, not very surprising here, the reigning unanimous MVP Lamar Jackson. He's coming off a phenomenal season in which he broke the all-time mark for rushing yards by a quarterback with 1,206, and at the same time, his touchdown pass percentage of 9.0%, it was the highest since Y.A. Tittle back in 1963. When you go back to that MVP season, there were several other highly impressive numbers, like having more total touchdowns than his punter Sam Cook had punts, and the fact he put all those numbers together despite sitting out the season finale, but none of that really captures how electric his performance truly was. This offseason, Baltimore added one of the top 5 backs in the draft in J.K. Dobbins from Ohio State to give that record-setting rushing attack another boost. They made some excellent wide receiver picks in the later rounds of the draft. Marquise Hollywood Brown, he's coming into his second season and hopefully not dealing with a foot injury again, which bothered him all of last season. I expect Hollywood to open up the offense a little more and create that special connection with his quarterback. And without a full offseason to prepare for this unique Greg Roman offense, the Ravens led by Lamar will once again be tough to stop. And since I have them earning the AFC's number 1 seed once again, I expect Action Jackson to be right up there in the race for MVP honors with the number one guy, which, to no surprise to anybody, is Patrick Mahomes. He's the best player in the league, and if we get a full 16 games out of him again, I expect the numbers to match the amount of highlight plays we see from him on a weekly basis. For the Chiefs offense, other than losing a starting guard, which might have actually been replaced with an equal player, and swapping the starting running back for a stud first round pick, who I already talked about in Clyde Edwards-Helaire, nothing about the offense has changed. Tyreek Hill is still the most dangerous receiver in the league. Travis Kelce is a nightmare to match up with. Sammy Watkins, he took a pay cut to stay with the Super Bowl champs. Kansas City also miraculously found a way to bring back DeMarcus Robinson. And Mecole Hardman, he's bound to make a jump in his second season after how productive he was on very limited opportunities. Just 41 targets, 26 catches, 538 yards and 6 touchdowns. I think having Edwards-Helaire to give that high-flying attack a physical presence and picking up some unlikely first downs when Mahomes checks it down to him, that'll only help the quarterback. Maybe most important, the Chiefs did not lose their offensive coordinator Eric Bieniemy, who was thought to be one of the lead candidates for a head coaching position, and he will continue to build creative and aggressive game plans together with head coach Andy Reid. 2 more names to keep an eye on. I already talked about Kyler Murray as an Offensive Player of the Year candidate. And then Josh Allen of the Bills. If he can get that deep passing game going and put up some big numbers for what I believe will be a very strong team as well, he could get some recognition. Now let's look through these candidates one more time here. Obviously MVP Patrick Mahomes, just talked about him. Saquon Barkley, he's my favorite for Offensive Player of the Year. Myles Garrett on the defensive side of the ball. Ben Roethlisberger, my pick for Comeback Player of the Year after he was out pretty much all of last season. Clyde Edwards-Helaire is part of that Chiefs offense. That could be a scary guy. Chase Young, an unbelievable prospect. I think we'll put it together right away, together with the rest of that Washington defensive line. And then Sean Payton getting recognition as Coach of the Year, assuming he leads the Saints to the NFC's number 1 seed. So that wraps up our predictions for all the season awards. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, just share it with one friend, that would already help out a lot. For more of these breakdowns, fantasy content and everything else, check out the other videos on my YouTube channel or go to my page, hellosforfootballtalk.com. You can also see my social media link down below. You can always contact me there. And as I've mentioned already, I will be back Friday already, predicting the entire 2020 playoff picture. So until then, see you later. Peace.